Today on The World Today, Western leaders urge restraint from Israel as U.S. President Joe Biden and UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak push for greater protection of Palestinian hospitals and civilians. Hamas armed wing says it's ready to release 70 hostages only in return for a 5-day truce. Plus, offensive launched by anti-coup forces in Myanmar intensifies in its border with India, spreading across the country. Hello everyone, welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. The US and UK, like many other countries, offer their full support to Israel following the October 7th Hamas attack. Analysts believe that commitment stayed steadfast as the Israeli military launched its retaliatory strikes on Gaza. However, over the last few days, appeals to Israel to exercise restraint have been stepped up, with US President Joe Biden and UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak both pushing for greater protection of Palestinian hospitals and civilians. Mr. Biden told reporters at the White House on Monday that he hoped for less intrusive action around the Al-Shifa hospital, saying that Gaza City's largest hospital must be protected.
The President's going to answer, guys.
The hospital in Gaza.
The hospital in
Kelly
Gaza. Have you expressed any specific concerns to Israel on that, sir?
Well, you know, I have not been reluctant in expressing my concerns what's going on. And it's my hope and expectation that there will be less intrusive action relative to the hospital. We're in contact and we're with the Israelis. Also, there is an effort to take this pause to deal with the release of prisoners. And that's being negotiated as well with the Qataris are engaged. And so I remain somewhat hopeful. But the hospital must be protected.
In the meantime, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has spoken of the terrible suffering of Palestinians in Gaza, saying too many civilians are dying. He also called for pauses in the fighting. Speaking at a banquet in London, he used his speech to repeat his call for a two-state solution in the Middle East as Israel's war on Hamas continues. Neither Washington nor London have called for a full-blown ceasefire despite pressure from French President Emmanuel Macron. The Israeli government claims Hamas has created the crisis at Al-Shifa for propaganda reasons and uses tunnels under the hospital as a base, but Hamas denies this. The White House is also calling for the protection of patients and hospitals in Gaza. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says Israel shares the Biden administration's view that firefights should not take place in hospitals in Gaza. He notes that the Israeli government has also said that they are prepared to provide fuel to hospitals to ensure they can continue to operate. Apologize for the freeze in that track, but let's continue on with the program. The President of the United States and two of his cabinet members are being sued for failing to prevent and aiding and abetting genocide in Gaza. The federal complaint filed on Monday is against President Joe Biden, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. The suit is accusing them of what it terms failure to prevent and complicity in the Israeli government's unfolding genocide. New York civil liberties group, the Center for Constitutional Rights, filed the suit on behalf of Palestinian human rights organizations. Palestinians in Gaza and U.S. citizens with relatives in the besieged enclave that has faced more than a month of relentless bombardment by Israel, which receives funding and weapons from the U.S. government. More than 11,200 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since Israel launched attacks on October 7. This followed a Hamas attack in Israel in which about 1,400 people were killed. In the meantime, doctors and medics in Gaza have been speaking of the dire situation they are facing. The chief surgeon of the International Committee of the Red Cross says the situation at the European hospital in Gaza is relentless. In a video released on Monday, Dr. Tom Potokar said his team of doctors at the hospital only had enough time to see half the patients admitted, and the hospital has run out of blood for transfusions.
Another totally exhausting day. Ward round this morning, saw half the patients because we don't have time to see all of them. And then we've been in theatre, done about 5 cases today. The last one, another terrible story. Young man lost all his family, 40% burns, a lot of full fitness with some huge shrapnel wounds in his buttock, in his chest, and his foot. He was already in a state of early shock and septic when we got him on the table, so very difficult for the anaesthetist to decide what sort of anaesthesia. We're caught between a rock and a hard place. If we don't do an operation, then he will die from the sepsis. If we do an operation, he may die from problems with blood loss, with ongoing wound infection, hypertension, etc. There's no blood in the hospital to give him, which is what he needs. So we can just do the best we can, really. Another 4 admissions today, 5 admissions. It's now 6:30, so we're already 10, 11 hours into the day. So not sure if we'll get around to being able to see them tomorrow, today, but we'll have to see them tomorrow. And again, a full list tomorrow. So unfortunately, it's just relentless.
As we reported earlier, the White House is calling for the protection of patients and hospitals in Gaza. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says Israel shares the Biden administration's view that firefights should not take place in hospitals in Gaza. He notes that the Israeli government has also said that it's prepared to provide fuel to hospitals to ensure they can continue to operate.
We do not want to see firefights in hospitals. We want to see patients protected. We want to see hospitals protected. We have spoken with the Israeli government about this, and they have said they share that view, that they do not want to see firefights in hospitals. And you've heard from IDF spokespeople stating things along those lines. The Israeli government has also told us that they are prepared to provide fuel to hospitals to ensure that they can continue to operate, and that for certain hospitals, they actually have not been able to be in communication with the people who are actually running the hospitals. So that's something we will continue to work on. But the position of the United States on this matter is clear. Hospitals should be protected. Hospitals should be able to run effectively so that medical care can be given to patients. And finally, to the extent people need to be evacuated from one hospital to another hospital in order to ensure the continuation of care, evacuation routes have to be safe. And the Israeli government has told us as recently as today that there are and will continue to be evacuation routes for people leaving hospital compounds. So we have been very transparent about the fact that we have limited visibility into both the whereabouts of the hostages within Gaza and their condition. And I said as recently as yesterday that we have 9 missing Americans, 1 missing green card holder, and I cannot look in the eye and tell you how many of those hostages are still alive. We do have information, and I'll be careful about how I characterize that, about some of the hostages and a notion that there are a substantial number of hostages who are not just alive, but who could potentially be part of a hostage release. But I couldn't give you a number of exactly how many Americans would be included in that. That's something that we will have to work through as we continue these negotiations. And of course, we won't know for certain until we we actually get the release of those hostages and they're safely returned to their families. So that's something we're going to continue to work on. I think there are circumstances where more than 4 hours a day is going to be necessary. And in fact, the Israeli government has recognized that. They've extended some of these pauses to 7 hours, for example, to create the corridor so that people can move around safely. We believe pauses should not be dictated by a strict timetable. They should be dictated by what is necessary to achieve the objectives. And those objectives are safe passage, the ability to move around humanitarian aid. And then ultimately, we'd like to see considerably longer pauses, days, not hours, in the context of a hostage release, and that's being actively worked on as well.
In the meantime, international NGO Human Rights Watch says Israel's repeated attacks on medical facilities, health personnel and ambulances in Gaza should be investigated as war crimes. According to HRW, the Israeli military attacks are further destroying Gaza's healthcare system at a time when medics have unprecedented numbers of severely injured patients and hospitals have run out of medicine and basic equipment. A war crime is a serious violation of international humanitarian law committed with criminal intent. HRW is now urging the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory and the International Criminal Court to investigate Israel's actions. Well, Gaza's last working flour mill might be facing a huge catastrophe should their fuel run out this week. Abdul Daim Abu Awad, the mill's general director, says while they have enough wheat for a month's worth of processing, they only have fuel until Thursday. A crowd formed outside the Salem mill, one of the biggest in Gaza and located in the center of the strip, some desperate to find food as Israel's weeks-long offensive against Hamas in the enclave reduced supplies. The mill once had 50 employees working to produce 360 tons of flour daily on several production lines, but due to a shortage of electricity brought on by the war, they could only power online for 12 hours a day using a generator. The UN Humanitarian Office on Monday said Gaza has wheat supplies that should be sufficient for 12 days, but the only operative mill in the enclave cannot transform the wheat into flour due to electricity outages. It also said there are no stocks left of vegetable oil, pulses, sugar or rice. People are on average queuing for 4 to 6 hours to receive half of the normal bread ration. Meanwhile, a lack of fuel in Gaza will bring aid delivery and communications to a halt as soon as Tuesday. This is according to the head of the UN's Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in the occupied Palestinian territory, Andrea De Domenico. Briefing a news conference, Mr. De Domenico said depleting fuel and medical supplies are leaving Gazans' lives hanging by a thread. Citing reports from Palestine telecommunications company, the UN official said that all the company's systems will be shut down by Thursday, impeding communications.
In Gaza, fighting around Al-Shifa hospital intensified over the weekend. In Al-Shifa hospital, critical infrastructure were damaged, including water tanks, oxygen stations, the cardiovascular facility and the maternity ward. 3 nurses were also reported killed. Many of the people that were in the hospital have fled or tried to flee. Some have remained behind. It's very difficult for us to establish how many are still in the premises. Yesterday also, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society announced that Al-Quds Hospital in Gaza City was no longer operational due to the damages to the main generator line, which could not be repaired during the conflict and the consequent power outage. In particular, we call everybody to respect hospitals. IHL specifically protect hospitals and medical personnel. Hospitals must not be made places of warfare. Any military operation around or within hospital must take steps to spare and protect the patients, medical staff and other civilians. And all feasible precautions must be taken, including the effective warnings, which consider the ability of patients, medical staff, and other civilians to evacuate safely. I heard that the first day There were some babies, a couple of babies that passed away after the incubators had been disconnected, and they were pulled out of the oxygen support and the comfort of the heated incubator. And I know there were 43 babies that were originally in incubators, and there were 41 patients under ICU in intensive care unit. So, but I do not have an update considering what happened in the last days in terms of losses of communication.
And one of the latest reactions to the fighting between Israel and Hamas is British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who says that too many civilians are dying in Gaza, calling for pauses in the fighting. Speaking at a banquet in London, he used his speech to repeat his call for a two-state solution in the Middle East as Israel's war on Hamas continues. Neither Washington nor London have called for a full-blown ceasefire despite pressure from French President Emmanuel Macron. The Israeli government claims Hamas has created the crisis at Al-Shifa for propaganda reasons and uses tunnels under the hospital as a base, but Hamas denies this.
These are deeply challenging times for our world. Events far beyond our shores echo here at home, with implications for our security, our economy, and our very social fabric. It falls to us to do everything we can to shape these events. And so we've delivered one of the most significant years for British foreign policy in recent times. That's due in no small part to James Cleverly, and I know that he'll bring the same vigour to the equally vital job of Home Secretary. And I'm pleased to have appointed a new Foreign Secretary who will build on everything that we have achieved in the last year. What motivated Hamas to launch their horrific attack on Israel? It wasn't just hatred. It was also their fear that a new Middle East was being born, one that would see Israel normalizing relations with its neighbors, which gave hope for a better, more secure, more prosperous way forward. Why did Russia invade Ukraine? Because Putin feared the emergence of a modern, reforming, thriving democracy on his doorstep and wanted to pull it back into some imperialist fantasy of the past. So we must keep alive the promise of a better future, bolster those striving for it, and stand up for the innocents who Russia see as targets and Hamas see as human shields. So Israel must be able to defend itself against terror, restore its security, and bring the hostages home. But there are many things that Israel must do as part of its response. We've been clear that they must act within international law. They must take all measures to protect innocent civilians, including at hospitals, stop extremist violence in the West Bank, and allow more aid into Gaza.
Meanwhile, the Israeli army has released a video it claims shows the Rantisi hospital in Gaza that was reportedly used to hold hostages. According to the Israeli army, a basement facility at the Rantisi hospital had weapons as well as a motorbike reportedly used to transport the hostages. It also claims living quarters at the hospital basement was where the hostages were kept. The release of this Israeli army video comes amid fighting at Gaza's main hospital, Al-Shifa. Israel says Al-Shifa sits on top of a Hamas headquarters, using the hospital's patients as human shields, which Hamas has also denied.
This is Rantisi Hospital. And this is the place where I showed you the tunnel. I want you to see. Look at what Hamas is holding inside the hospital. I want you to understand, this kind of gear is a gear for a major fight. People shooting RPGs from hospitals. This is Hamas firing RPGs for hospitals. The world has to understand who is Israel fighting against. They were all used in the massacre of the 7th of October. They even have bullets in this motorcycle. So they came back from the massacre on the 7th of October We can see the ventilation air that was done improvisedly to this area. And we can see infrastructures that was built in here. You're now entering into the room where we suspect the hostages were being held. I want you to look at this room. People are putting curtains with nothing above, just wall. No reason to put here a curtain unless you want to film hostages and deliver movies. Says, we are in an operation. The operation against Israel started in the 7th of October. This is a Guardian list where every terrorist writes his name and every terrorist has his own shift. Next to a house of a terrorist, this is one of the senior terrorists who is the head of the operational naval operations that led the raids into Israel. His house is 200 yards from the hospital of Rantisi. Next to his house, there is a tunnel. The tunnel is let down more than 20 meters down. The rowboat found a door that is bulletproof, it's explosives proof, so it looks like a hard evidence, a clear evidence that the hospital direction is connected. This is a covered tunnel. It's part of the same floor and it slides down here.
Welcome back to The World Today as we continue our coverage on the Israel-Hamas war. And joining us on the program is international affairs analyst Calvin Dark. He joins us from Washington, D.C. A welcome to you, Calvin.
Good to be here.
Right, so what do you make of the latest comments from the US and UK leaders? Not calling for an outright ceasefire, though, but pushing for greater protection of Palestinian hospitals and civilians, and perhaps for a little pause. A change in tone, perhaps?
What I think they're trying to do is bridge the gap between the first priority, I believe, for the Biden administration and the United States, to allow Israel what it needs to do to defend itself, and then the second priority being limiting the humanitarian crisis that is happening. Now, that is at odds with what, for example, a lot of Americans believe. A lot of Americans believe that there should be a ceasefire. So I think what we're seeing is just the result of the United States trying to do what Israel has asked, while also trying to appease American citizens about this. And, you know, and I just want to say really quickly, Biden said he wanted less intrusive action. I can't think of a weaker way to say, let's have less humanitarian civilian casualties. I think what that demonstrates is that the policy priority of Biden is to support Israel. I genuinely believe he does want less civilian casualties. I do believe that he's putting pressure behind the scenes and in public in Israel. But when it comes to the real pressure, as in putting conditions on our aid or going against Israel diplomatically in the UN, I don't see Biden taking those steps anytime soon.
Right. As you were speaking, of course, we were, seeing visuals of the UK Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who's also towing that line. Do you think that they might, at any time soon, call on Israel to actually say, you know what, we know we've been supporting you, we know that you're defending yourselves, but hey, it's time to really slow down and stop the onslaught on Gaza, as in you've done enough?
I think that we will continue to hear calls of that. And I do believe that behind the scenes, the United States is going to be saying that louder and louder. But I don't expect the United States to do anything, actually, or to put any pressure to make that happen. Unfortunately, in my opinion, that is the kind of the line that's drawn. This country, I don't see changing that, particularly because we're in an election season, and him changing that policy towards Israel puts him at an electoral disadvantage in the United States.
And with the bombardments we've continued to see from Israel, How long do you think staunch allies the U.S. can go in supporting what it calls Israel's right to defend itself? And how would you assess the role of the U.S., the role the U.S. has been playing since this conflict began? You know, that's the particular question I want you to answer.
Well, to tackle that second part first, I think that what the United States could do is put pressure. And by pressure, I mean condition the aid to Israel on ending the bombardment. I also think at the United Nations, the United States could play a role by not using its veto. However, I don't see either of those things happening. Now, when it comes to how long these bombardments will continue, that is a very good question because Israel has said, you know, until Hamas is eradicated. Well, even if they're successful in getting rid of the leaders, Hamas is a movement and an ideology. You can't destroy that with bombs. And the more that Israel does in Gaza that creates this tension among Palestinians, they might actually succeed in creating a group that is more anti-Israel, more violent than Hamas.
And last week, the UN Human Rights Agency, Human Rights Watch, accused both sides of this war, that's Israel and Hamas, of committing war crimes. Now, today, we've heard from the NGO, which says Israel's repeated attacks on medical facilities, health personnel, and ambulances and other, you know, such facilities in Gaza should be investigated as war crimes. Do you agree?
I believe they should definitely be investigated, and I believe that we should have a standard around the world for these things. For example, if it was not just for Russia to hospitals and schools in Ukraine, then the same applies to Israel. And I also think, you know, what Hamas did, Hamas is a terrorist. What Hamas did in Israel was horrific. But Israel is a country, a democracy, an ally of the United States. It has to be held to a higher standard than a terrorist group they're trying to defeat. So I think that investigation into these acts by Israel and Hamas is definitely warranted.
And looking at the humanitarian crisis this war has caused on both sides, what would you say the solution is to this?
Well, I think that that is the question that no one has the real answer to. However, I do know what the answer isn't. And that is, we've heard a lot from Netanyahu that they're potentially going to occupy Gaza until the force in Gaza is a force they believe they can work with. It's not a threat to Israel. Occupation of Gaza is not going to help move forward to end this current conflict or the greater Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So I hope the United States and the international community will help answer that question. Who will fill that power vacuum after Hamas so that it's not Israel reoccupying Gaza?
Right, Calvin, thank you for your time and thank you for sharing your perspective on the situation.
Thank you.
Well, the armed wing of the Palestinian group Hamas says that it's ready to release up to 70 women and children held in Gaza in return for a 5-day truce. In a recorded audio, spokesperson for the Hamas armed wing, Abu Obaida, said that he told Qatari mediators that the truce should include a complete ceasefire and allowing aid and humanitarian relief everywhere in the Gaza Strip. He went on to accuse Israel of procrastinating and evading the price of the deal. Israel launched its campaign last month to wipe out Hamas, which runs the Gaza Strip, after its gunmen rampaged through southern Israel, killing civilians early in October. And family members of ill Israeli women being held hostage by Hamas are urging the immediate return home of their loved ones. 2 women told a press conference in Tel Aviv that their relatives need urgent medical care. Adva Ada said her 85-year-old grandmother, Yafa Adva, was running out of time, and Yarden Gonen said her sister, Romi Gonen, suffered from asthma and chronic kidney stones. Hostages' relatives are urging access for international aid and health organizations such as the Red Cross to be allowed to treat hostages held in Gaza. Organization has not said that neither organization has said it has been able to meet the hostages since the start of the war.
We have no time. My grandmother has no time. We need to return them back home now. We need the International Women's Organization to shout with us that the woman's life of the Israelis are not less important than the woman's life all around the world.
My sister has asthma and chronic sinusitis. We can only imagine how she's struggling, gasping for air, wherever she's being held underground. Can you understand the feeling of fighting to breathe? Such a basic need. She also has chronic kidney stones that cause her for countless of hospitalizations and horrible pain. Do you think anyone over there cares for her pain?
We should stop it now. All of us. Hamas has to release them immediately. Immediately. This is not a war. This is a crime against humanity, against all women and mothers around the world.
And at least 6 Palestinians were killed earlier today in the occupied West Bank by Israeli forces. The Palestinian Health Ministry and Palestinian media said at least 3 of those that were killed in an airstrike, an Israeli drone strike. The Palestinians' official news agency Wafa reported citing a hospital in the western city of Tulkarm and says Israeli troops shot dead at least 2 Palestinians during earlier clashes in a refugee camp in the city. The worsening violence comes after more than 18 months of bloodshed that has fueled fears the West Bank could erupt into a bigger conflict and become a new front in the Israel-Hamas war. News from home, Nigeria has made her position clear on the Israeli-Palestinian crisis at the emergency Joint Arab-Islamic Summit in the Saudi capital, Riyadh. Her leaning coincides with the ongoing Israeli bombardment in the Gaza Strip. The summit was convened to discuss the war taking place in the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian territories.
We meet under tragic circumstances when sustained attacks on the Gaza Strip has led to the senseless loss of human lives, continues to threaten the lives of innocent civilians and has created a humanitarian disaster. Nigeria welcomes this intervention by the OIC and the Arab League to emphatically add its voice to the call for an end to the violence and loss of lives of innocent civilians. The disproportionate use of force against the people of Gaza begs the question, how many more must die to avenge the act of aggressors? Abrahamic religions have provided ample guidance for governments to follow for declaring war against another. The writings of 12th century scholar Bin Rushdi, known in the Western world as Averroes, on the subject of just war, influenced many, including the Christian philosopher St. Thomas Aquinas. Collectively, this body of work provided for what came to be known as the just war theory, that governments, responsible governments, use to determine whether war and aggression is morally justifiable. The war against the people of Gaza cannot be contemplated in the same breath of the just war doctrine and has to stop for the sake of humanity. Pray tell, where is the rule of law? Your Excellencies, today we live in a data-driven world. The question we have to ask ourselves is, where is the evidence that the violence meted out by Israel on Gaza is having any deleterious effect on Hamas? We must work collectively to bring an end to the violence and find a lasting solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict based on the UN-prescribed two-state solution. Nigeria stands firmly by this. Thank you for listening.
Meanwhile, deaths in the Gaza Strip are becoming more worrying to the Saudi government, resulting in an emergency meeting on the sidelines of the Saudi Africa Summit in Riyadh, which once again called for a ceasefire for humanitarian purposes. Spokesperson for the King Saud Relief Fund, which coordinates the kingdom's humanitarian aid to Gaza, called for an end to the war as the number of women and children killed continues to rise. He warns that the war in Gaza could result in more wars in the near future. He was speaking to our foreign affairs correspondent, Amarachi Ubani, on the sidelines of the summit.
Thousands of people have been killed in Gaza in over 4 weeks since the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th. And with the Israeli airstrikes becoming more frequent, Gaza authorities say over 11,000 people have died, more than 4,500 of them children. The situation in Gaza is worrying for Saudi Arabia, which has joined other Arab nations in providing humanitarian aid and medical supplies in the course of the war. A spokesperson for King Saud Relief Fund, Dr. Samir Al-Jatali, who was at the Saudi Africa Summit in Riyadh, said he was there to raise awareness on the devastation in Gaza.
Yeah, I tell you that 70% of the total people killed, they are women and children. 4,400 child has been killed. UNRWA is saying that as we talk over now, me and you, in every 10 minutes, one Palestinian child killed because of Israel and 2 wounded. So as we're talking now, to probably in the last 10 minutes, 1 Palestinian child has been killed and two wounded. This has nothing to do with Hamas, actually. And the other thing, let me tell you, give you another example. Israelis tell the Palestinian, leave the north and go south. Do you know that 30% of the people moved to the south has been killed till now? So those people followed the order of Israelis, and they left the north going to the south, and still they are attacked. The hospital has been attacked just for the lie, telling that Hamas members, they are in hospitals. Nobody could prove that there is Hamas members inside those hospitals. 50% of the hospitals that are out of service right now, okay? And the other hospitals, every day, they are harassed that they will going to be bombarded, and they have to close. And although they have premature infants in the incubators, and they ask those hospitals to actually transfer them and transfer all the injured or wounded people. It's not matter of Hamas, unfortunately. It is, letting the Palestinian people living in Gaza to paying the highest price for a crime they did not commit, simply because Hamas attacked Israel.
He warns of further wars as the fighting continues, saying the Arabs will never forget and will not forgive Israel for its actions.
This hatred will create more hatred. The war will bring another war. You know, Arab will not forget. You know, as African, you know that. Arabs, as African, Asian, we will not forget what's happening in Gaza. And this is probably will create another generation that keen to take revenge of who killed his father, his mother, his sister. Do you know that about 54, no more than that, more than 54 families being erased? That means the whole family, it doesn't exist anymore. Well, nobody can accept that. I think if Israel will not listen to the wisdom, you know, to the world in general, they will going to pay the price later on. If not now, they're going to pay it later on.
Arab and Muslim leaders decried what they called war crimes by Israel in Gaza in the emergency meeting on the Strip on Saturday. They demanded the UN Security Council take a decisive and binding decision to impose a cessation of aggression. Whether that will impact on the war and Israel's decision is yet to be seen. Here in Riyadh, Amarachi Ubani, Channel Television News.
Seven Romanian pilots have become the first trainees at a NATO-backed regional F-16 training hub, which opened on Monday and will also be available to all allies and partners, including Ukraine. The European F-16 Training Center is hosted at a Romanian military air base near the southeastern town of Vitesti and is using F-16 jets provided by the Netherlands with training support from Lockheed Martin and its contractors. Dutch Colonel Olivier Bock says the hub could start training Ukrainian pilots as early as next year. The United States in August approved sending F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine from Denmark and the Netherlands to defend against Russia as soon as pilot training was completed. Ukraine has actively sought the US-made F-16 fighter jets to help it counter Russian air superiority. Asked when the Netherlands would be sending F-16s to Ukraine, Dutch Defense Minister Kaya Ollongren said it depended on the preparations on the Ukrainian side.
Today is the official opening of this European F-16 training center here in Romania. And that's a significant step. I'm really proud of how fast we were able to achieve this training center, the opening of the training center, having the actual airframes also in place. Next step is that training will start with Romanian crews, pilots and crews, and of course planning ahead also for Ukraine. The Netherlands and Denmark have taken the lead in providing the training to Ukrainian pilots. We have enlarged the coalition with many other countries, also countries doing initial training for pilots. So as soon as possible, we hope also to welcome here Ukrainian pilots and crews to start the training. But I think the F-16 is a very important capability for the Ukraine Air Force. It will substantially strengthen their Air Force, and it will also strengthen the air defense of Ukraine. So not as the only capability, it's not going to be a game changer in itself, but making the armed forces stronger, making the Air Force stronger, is making Ukraine stronger, and it's making it more difficult for Russia. I think it's vital that we continue to provide Ukraine with the help they need, military aid, training, etc. And therefore, European funding is also essential. As Europe has done so far, I think we have to be prepared to continue this effort. So, yes, I welcome the proposal that the High Representative has done, and I would also welcome European decision-making on this as soon as possible. I think we cannot afford any fatigue when it comes to Ukraine. This is a real threat, and a threat not only to Ukraine, but also a threat to Europe. So we really cannot afford fatigue. We must increase our efforts. We must continue our support to Ukraine in every possible way.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin says the U.S. allegations that Russia and China are helping North Korea to dodge sanctions are absolutely Unfounded. Earlier on Tuesday, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said in Seoul that he was concerned that China and Russia were helping North Korea to expand its military capabilities by enabling it to evade United Nations sanctions. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says the claims are not confirmed by anything, and each new such statement further devalues all the others on this issue. And British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has chaired his first cabinet meeting since a reshuffle which saw the return of former leader David Cameron and the sacking of former Interior Minister Suella Braverman. The ministerial reshuffle followed growing criticism of Ms. Braverman from opposition lawmakers and members of the governing Conservatives, enabling Mr. Sunak to bring in allies and remove ministers he felt were not performing.
Welcome, especially a warm welcome to those for whom it's their first cabinet, and also welcome to those for whom it may not be their first time. Lovely to have you all here. Now, our purpose is nothing less than to make the long-term decisions that are going to change our country for the better, and I know that this strong and united team is going to deliver that change for everybody. We've got an important week coming up. On Wednesday we'll have inflation numbers, we'll also have the Supreme Court ruling on our Rwanda plan, and next Wednesday the Chancellor will be delivering an important autumn statement. And across all of that, I'm confident that we can demonstrate to the country that we're making progress on the priorities that I set out at the beginning of the year: to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists, and to stop the boats. But you all know that is not the limit of our ambitions. We want to build a better future for our children and for our grandchildren, and that is what this team is going to do. Whether it's navigating the crises in Ukraine and the Middle East to demonstrate that we will stand up for our values and provide security for everyone here at home, but also to make the big, bold decisions that will drive change. A new approach to infrastructure spending, ushering in a generation of children that will grow up smoke-free, reforms to how we approach net zero to save families thousands of pounds, and radically reforming our education system with more teachers, higher standards, and more apprenticeships. That's the change that we're going to deliver, and looking around this table, I know that we have an energetic and enthusiastic team that is going to deliver for the country. So let's get to work. Thanks very much.
And as for the new Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, Londoners are largely welcoming the return of the former British Prime Minister to PM Rishi Sunak's cabinet. Speaking from London Bridge, Londoner and finance worker Chris Robinson said it appeared to be a chess move to bring back Mr. Cameron ahead of elections due to be held next year. And Turkish department store Beymen is marking its 50th anniversary with a Golden Opulence exhibition, which celebrates the history of luxury in Turkey and the Ottoman Empire. With contributions from Alexander McQueen, Balmain, Valentino, Tod's and Pierre Louis. The designs in the collection are inspired by Turkey's diverse culture. The exhibition, curated by Lawrence Benet, showcases dresses, kaftans, suits, and everyday objects with adornments rooted in the history of Turkey and the Ottoman Empire. Beymen is a department store chain focusing on luxury items with more than 40 in Turkey alone.
Beymen is celebrating its first 50 years with a monumental project that sheds light to 500 years of luxury in these lands and then takes this remarkable journey into the present day. We do have a very strong heritage of luxury in these lands. I think it's mostly driven by the love of beauty and the fusion of cultures from the Ottoman times to the Turkish Republic today, and it's best demonstrated by the craftsmanship and the selection of precious materials. So that was the purpose. The exhibition is created by Lawrence Benet with the expertise of Bureau Betak. And the exhibition is composed of three major themes. The first one is called Precious Dreams, and it's inspired by a treasure chest with glitter and splendor. The second section is called Bosphorus Gardens, and it is inspired by Gardens of Eden with abundance of color. And the final section of the exhibition is called Mineral Roundness, and the inspiration there is the mystic skyline of Istanbul with its domes and architectural wonders.
And the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery is celebrating King Charles' 75th birthday with a gun salute in Green Park near London's Buckingham Palace. The King, who held a celebratory event for other individuals and organizations, also turning 75 on Monday, and is also hosting a reception on Tuesday to herald the work of nurses and midwives, part of the events marking 75 years of the National Health Service. Well, happy birthday, King Charles. That's our program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joker Rogers. Bye for now.